Fox News correspondent Benjamin Hall has been injured while reporting. I want to go to CNN's Oliver Darcy with the latest. Oliver, what's known about this?
Hey, Anderson. Yeah, details are slim, and this is, of course, news that we never want to report. But I do want to read to you a memo that Fox News CEO Suzanne Scott just put out to employees that offers a little bit more information. She said in a letter to employees that earlier today, their correspondent, Benjamin Hall, was injured while news gathering outside of Kiev in Ukraine. She says, we have minimal level of details right now, but Ben is hospitalized and our teams on the ground are working to gather additional information. She, of course, says that this is a stark reminder for all journalists who are putting their lives on the line every day to deliver the news from a war zone, and ask for people to keep Ben and his family in prayers. Of course, Anderson, this news comes one day after another American journalist, Brett Renaud, was killed in Ukraine. Local officials there said that he was killed by Russian forces, and another American journalist was also injured. Journalists try not to be the center of the story or in the story at all, Anderson, as you know, but unfortunately they're now finding themselves in the crosshairs as they're reporting and gathering information in Ukraine. Of course, it's deeply disturbing to see this, and press advocacy groups like the Committees to Protect Journalists has come out and denounced these attacks on members of the media, Anderson.
Yeah, Oliver Darcy, appreciated that. Obviously, our thoughts are with Benjamin Hall and his family as well, and we'll bring you more information as we get it. Alisyn and Victor, as Oliver was saying, we have seen increasing attacks on journalists and intensifying attacks on everybody, specifically in Kyiv. The news tightening around that city and the intensity of the shelling also increasing.
Yeah, it's awful. Our thoughts, of course, and prayers out to Ben Hall and everyone over at Fox and his family as well, especially after the conversation just had with another reporter's friend.
No one's safe. There are no boundaries. Obviously, Russian troops are not respecting any so-called boundaries, and it's getting more dangerous. He's being described as kind, gifted, and infused with humanity. Those are just some of the tributes for the first American believed to be killed in Ukraine, award-winning journalist Brent Renaud. Renaud was 50 years old, and he was filming a documentary on refugees for Time. Another American journalist was with Renaud when he was killed and said Russian forces opened fire on them.
We're going to film other refugees leaving, and we got into a car. Somebody offered to take us to the other bridge, and we crossed a checkpoint, and they start shooting at us. So the driver turned around, and they kept shooting. It's two of us. My friend is Brent Renaud, and he's been shot and left behind.
And how is he?
I don't know. I don't know.
You don't know what happened to him?
He was. I saw him being shot in the neck, and we got split.
Kyiv region police accuse Russian forces in Renaud's death, posting a picture of his body and passport. CNN has not been able to verify the police details. Joining us now is a friend and colleague of Brent Renaud, Jeff Newton. And Jeff came to know Renaud after hiring him for several projects for 60 Minutes and Vice News. And Jeff, we're looking at photos of you two together just in all sorts of places where you were working, obviously in really tough conditions, it looks like. And so just tell us about your friend Brent and what made him so special as a journalist and, of course, a friend.
Well, I think the most important thing to know about him is he wasn't really a thrill seeker, which sounds strange for people who cover conflicts, but he's just one of those people that loved people, and the human condition was what he was after. He wanted to understand what was, what people were having to deal with who were in the middle of these conflicts. And even when he was not in conflict zones, he was covering things like disadvantaged kids in Chicago school systems, or kids that were moving to homeless shelters in places like New Orleans. So he was just always trying to figure out, the story as it relates to how people were affected. The people that were in war zones, he was always concerned with who was stuck in the middle of it. He was just one of the people.
We actually have a little clip of him talking to young migrants who were trying to escape Honduras. So let's just play that.
¿Cómo se llama?
Brian.
Brian, are you traveling alone? Are you here by yourself?
Sí, viene solo.
He's alone. Sí. Where's the rest of your family?
No les avisé porque los iba a poner.
Why were the gang members after you?
Para que les sirva a ellos porque quieren hacer guerra con
I mean, we get what you mean just in that little clip. You know, he just wants the story. He's talking to this young boy who has left home. And so why were those stories important to Brent?
I think, you know, you have to understand where he came from. He's a kid that grew up in Arkansas and you know, went to Columbia, you know, University, Ivy League school, and then became a Neiman Fellow at Harvard. But deep down, he was still a kid from the country and, you know, from a small Southern town. And I think he related to them really well. And when he sat down with people, his interview questions were always very basic like that. He never was trying to be the story. He was always trying to get the story. And he did it in a way that was so very elemental and basic to journalism, which oftentimes today kind of gets lost in the kind of news programs that we see where the correspondent seems to always take front stage. He wasn't like that. He didn't want to be noticed.
Yeah, I got that. Just from watching that clip, I got that right away, that was his style. It was just pared down and just to get the story. And so I know that you recently spoke to him. So just tell us about that conversation.
You know, I was at a Ukraine protest in Washington, D.C. I live a little bit outside D.C. and he called me on the phone. He was looking for people who could help do fixing in Poland and Ukraine. And we talked for a while. And he, we spoke for, you know, probably 10 minutes and I knew he was going to go the next day and he went the next day. We always kind of, you know, when you cover wars for a living, like he and I do, you know, and you go to places like Somalia and Libya and, you know, Iraq and dealing with ISIS things. And, you know, you always think that you maybe might not see that person again. But when you talk to Brent, you're always talking to a guy who's very upbeat and very secure of what he's doing and why he's doing it. And, you know, I just wished him well and told him I'd see him when he got back.
So you never talk about things like that. I mean, you war correspondents, you know, you're so brave and we see it obviously in full display right now with so many of our correspondents in Ukraine. Do you talk about that before you leave? Do you talk about the risks?
Not much. You know, I used to be a roommate with Chris Hondros. You probably know his story. I was good friends with David Gilkey. You know his story. You know, I worked with Clarissa Ward when she was at 60 Minutes. So one of your great correspondents there, probably the best in the business. You know, you've spent a lot of time talking about that stuff and you spend a lot less time talking about the story if you're talking about that stuff. So I think, you know, you put it in the back of your mind, you know, what you're doing is risky and, you know, being in places like that, there's a very good chance that something could happen to you. But you also do your best risk assessments and you work with people you trust and you know, and you do your best to stay out of harm's way, but you can't account for every sniper rifle in a window and you can't account for every mortar that's shot that you can't hear coming in until it's too late. And that's just the nature of the beast. And I think that, you know, if you look at his life, he's 51 years old, I think, when he passed away, and he did more in the last 15 years in documentary filmmaking than probably anybody in the last 30 or 40. You know, he and his brother, Craig, you know, have done so many documentaries on so many important things. There was a time there where he won back-to-back DuPont Awards, which is extraordinary, and Pokes and Peabodys and Emmys. And that only comes from getting after it every day like he did.
Have you been able to talk to Craig or any of his loved ones back here?
Yeah, I talked to Craig several times a day, and he's dealing with some pretty heavy stuff right now in terms of dealing with getting Brent back. And actually Juan, which shouldn't be forgotten, who was with him, was my graduate student at Columbia about 18 months ago. So, you know, and he's had a second surgery today and hoping to get better and get him out of the country soon as well.